And now we come to at least to our final speaker, and I'm really happy. In the beginning, I mentioned that I think everything can be put under the umbrella of trust in AI, and that we just talked about so many topics around AI leads to a better understanding, and I think this is the base for trust. And now I have a mathematician here who has the focus in statistics and optimizations, and at the age of 22 he founded neurocat, and the company is at the forefront of quality and compliance in the field of AI. I have Florens Greßner here. Welcome to the stage. And a warm applause. Hi.
Thanks, Hi, thanks for the introduction. My name is Florens. I'm co-founder and CEO of neurocat. And for nearly 5 years now, we specialized in evaluating and mitigating risk for safety and security critical AI systems. And in over 25 projects with customers together, we implemented some testing strategies and enabled their mission-critical use cases like autonomous driving and push these topics forward. And so we want to enable trust in AI, but it's not that we are afraid that there will be some singularity or that they will replace humanity at some point. We just believe we can unleash the full potential of AI when we are providing tests and when the society can trust it and we can put it to the next level and enable more use cases also in security and safety critical domains. And this is what we're trying to push forward. We want to push the limits of AI and unleash its full potential. And to enable that, we want to empower these pioneers who want to bring the new use cases into mission-critical AI systems. However, now the classical security-critical and safety-critical domains now get extended. There will come some regulations that are also will be decided on this year. This is the AI Act, for example, and they published a taxonomy where they described what use case has risk and how much risk has it. And this is defined for the entire European Union, and they are like unacceptable risks, like something that is against the values of the European person. There are high-risk applications and lower risk applications that are rather going in the entertainment domain or in the chatbot domain where some transparency is necessary, but it does not provide a lot of risk to any person. And just to name the high-risk applications, because these now get very much extended, are the critical infrastructures, so everything related to oil, gas, water, and transportation in general. Also scoring systems that enable you to get a job or a credit or decide on that are high-risk applications. Law enforcement in general, so looking at the proof and seeing if it is sufficient. Not a proof, but looking at evidence and looking if it's enough for law enforcement, border control and biometrics, and public services in general, and everything that was safety critical before. The AI Act is also published, so it's publicly available, the draft at least. And for all these use cases, for the high-risk use cases, there are no requirements set that are needed to be followed by the ones who are in these exact use cases. And I just scratched out the one that is like unreasonable risk and the ones who don't have to be it, but for all these we have a high-risk application, and going in these use cases have to follow these requirements. They have to test the risk in a systematic manner and for every use case and for every relevant scenario, they have to evaluate the risk, and later in this talk I will want to show you how it's done. You have to have a strategy and a process how to mitigate risk. If you find a defect, how can you overcome this? And provide transparency and interpretability through explanations in the system itself. And some other topics that I just want to name to be complete, but I don't want to focus on in this talk, is a whole data governance around it, explaining why the data is sufficient and so on. A documentation of every architecture and logging every event that it's pushing through, and implementing human oversight that humans can always intervene into these high-risk use cases. But like I mentioned, I just want to focus on the testing and mitigating risk, because this is what we focused on the last 5 years, because we were specializing on safety-critical and security-critical use cases. So basically, with our customers together, we created test strategies and implemented them for them. And these already included, like, okay, first you have to define some quality requirements. What do we want to achieve? How good the system has to be in the relevant environments. But then you come to the point where you very quickly have to define a test approach, where you describe how you can measure risk and how you can do a defect triage that is nothing else than risk mitigation. And up to the last point of the automation strategy. So if your tests are not automated, then eventually they get just by budget cuts scratched out, and you're not concerned with it. So automation is always a very important thing, especially in AI. So starting with a quality requirement, what we are doing is first define the statistical confidence that is necessary. So in the automotive domain, it has to be some nines after the 99% of confidence in order for a system, a safety-critical system, to be deployed. Defining this will give you just some insights how much test data you have to use. And you have to select the metrics, the risk metrics, and the measures you want to follow and want to measure your systems against. And define the relevant scenario your system should work under. So should it work under rain, under noisy conditions, or under even dirty data and real-world applications. And setting these quality thresholds based on the metrics that you have to exceed. This is basically also everything what we are doing here is mentioned in the AI Act. You have to select these things, you have to set probabilistic thresholds, and you have to follow these, and these rules will become mandatory for this relevant use cases. So the second one is the testing approach. And here I just want to make a key difference to normal AI application and risky AI applications, because the way you measure the performance and measure the success of it is pretty much different. And I really hope I don't lose more audience because there will be some formulas, but I try to make it very, very easy on that. So basically, you will have some data, and we already realized there is some relevant data. So you defined relevant conditions and relevant scenarios your system should work in. So I just for the easiest, to make it easy, I just distinguish between two scenarios. You have clean data in your training set, and you have some dirty data that you will experience in the field when you deploy your system. And basically, the probability that these data points, you are exposed to them, like these dirty data points or these edge cases, real edge cases, the probability might be very, very low. And you clean data you experience like every day you experience this in your training set. So, and here is also the key point where this is a problem for high-risk applications. So you defined your performance metric because you had to do it in the quality requirements, and then at some point, in order to measure the performance, you just apply this performance metric on every single data point. So what's the problem here for high-risk applications? We see the dirty data is basically like this pink data point. The probability is very low. So for a performance metric, it is not important. And so if you optimize for this, it is not important to capture this little tiny data point that is very improbable. But probably it's a relevant condition or relevant scenario you have to follow. So now what is the contrary to risk? So basically risk is severity times exposure. So how severe is something, so how much damage it can create, and how probable it is that it will happen in the real world. So if we're looking at this one point, it might be very improbable, but if it's a very severe scenario and a very severe conditions, for example, a pedestrian on the street, you might want to capture this and you might want to mitigate this risk. So performance measures are not sufficient to estimate risk at this point. So basically just in the comparison, it is contradicts itself. The risk and performance basically contradicts itself because performance cannot cover all these points because rare scenarios and edge cases are just thrown under the bus. So, so what is important and what we pushed our customers towards is decoupling all the relevant scenarios and looking at every scenario separately. And this requires you to have a significant amount of data for every relevant scenario. And this leads you to a point that you are first able to measure, like the severity times exposure, what the definition of risk is, and also in the end, you are able to push your decision boundary much forward, that you're having a significant amount of data in all relevant scenarios, and you are not, like all these points are very important to you because severity can, every data point can have severe consequences. But what I didn't tell you is how do you get to these data points and how do these look like for AI applications. So basically the hazards and threat of AI system is there's a huge difference between the training data and the real world. So in the training data might be very much clean, and in the real world some noise might appear like rain, weather conditions, or camera noise that can just spontaneously appear in the field, basically. And the second point, and just one point, is not only for automotive, also for NLP systems, only a strap of characters, also these kind of corruptions, these kind of noise that make data dirty that you have to be concerned with if it's safety critical. The second point is, the first one was more safety related, now also security related. If there's an attacker that wants to tamper with your system or sees any kind of advantages, the attacker in an AI system is very much freely to do so because there is an active community of adversarial threats out there that get published very frequently that tell you how to put very imperceptible changes to your data point and then tamper with your model and manipulate its decision. For upload filters, this would be very much severe because you can just have some inappropriate content, put some imperceptible noise over it, upload it, and you will trick any AI system that might lead to it. So these are just how these data points are looking like, but how do we get there? How can we expand our data set and augment our data set such that these also get represented in a way that the model itself have to treat them as relevant data points. And these happen with test methods. So for the first part, for the safety critical part, corruptions are test methods that are just augmenting data for relevant scenarios. So they put basically on the clean data set some overlays, like weather conditions, like snow, rain, or dirt on the lens, or normal camera noise on it. You can extend your data set and you can use it for testing. And the second one is the adversarial threats. This is a very attacks. This is a very active community. They are published very frequently, and this is basically a cat and mouse game between attacker and defender. And in the end, the deployer of a system just has to decide what kind of budget an attacker has to exceed in order to tamper with the model and how much computation it has to go into that. So this is the testing approach. Basically, these were the test methods and why performance metrics are not sufficient in order to measure risk, especially high risk. And the third thing is defect triage. And So you have to have a systematic approach how you, if you find a defect and if you find a scenario failing, how are you dealing with it in the end? So first, I mean, we realized with vanilla performance metrics, you're not able to detect any defect because the defects are not there for very rare edge cases. And first, you have to test against these relevant scenarios. You have to decouple them and test against every single one of them that you defined before. Then you evaluate if your quality requirements are met. And for every of these relevant scenarios, and you minimize the risk by if a quality requirement is not satisfied for one scenario, you have to feedback the data that was not doing well into it and optimize the risk measure instead of just the performance measure. And in the end, you need to update the architecture and the procedures in order to do so. So this is a very complicated part, and we are not concerned with that. We are only concerned with the testing and providing the test methods. So this is in the creativity of the developers of the AI system itself, but we provide the metric that you can optimize against, and then test again and see if you are fulfilling all the risk requirements. And like this sounds like a very easy process and very straightforward, but this is also not just an abstract thought. So I don't want to scare more audience here, but basically a very profound, this is it's not an abstract thought, it's a really concrete optimization problem one can follow. I don't want to go too much into detail about this, how to select these architectures, but it is possible and you can optimize for risk instead of just optimizing for performance. So now the automation strategy, I already mentioned it, is a very crucial and important part. If you're outsourcing anything to humans, you might experience some budget cuts, and then what happens? Which kind of tests do you want to execute and which of them not? So automation is very crucial and important, especially for a very automated development workflow of AI. So the MLOps workflow that is very commonly used for AI development follows a quite standardized process. So in the beginning, you're having some data processing, annotating the data, cleaning out the data, and after them, you are selecting your architecture and your training procedures and your hyperparameters such that you can just train your model and hope that you will find one that is good enough to satisfy your quality requirements. There comes a evaluation part or a validation part in the MLOps life cycles that are also out there on these platforms. It's heavily concentrated on performance metrics, but performance metrics do not capture high-risk applications. And if you are satisfied with the model, you can put it into the deployment. And we, from our part, we put all our experience in creating testing strategies to our customers and enabling mission-critical use cases into our software platform. We call it 8-Kit. And 8-Kit basically contains all these relevant test methods where you can test against these different threats. It provides explainability methods and is pretty much, very much automated such that you can just implement it into your MLOps workflow and measure risk reliably. So we call it 8-Kit till you make it, the game, in order to minimize risk. So it's easy to integrate, and you can use it in your automated workflow because all the methods are automated and highly scalable. It is your robustness and explainability expert that selects your test methods for you and keeps you up to date with the standards and the risks that you're experiencing. And what I mentioned before, basically you're able to specify your quality requirements, your relevant scenarios, and just put them in and define the pipeline you want to execute in your automated workflow. Select the scenarios, if it's some lens flare effects, some lighting effects, or some weather condition or sensor noise. And we will provide you with an actionable report with the metrics that will help you to also estimate risks for your high-risk applications. And if you find you're not sufficiently good and your risk is not mitigated enough, all the data we produced while testing all these corruptions and all these adversarial attacks can be fed back into your training process, and you can targetedly improve the risk and minimize risk with that, and makes this all in a very automated workflow, feedback the data that doesn't work, retrain on it, and hope you will make it at some point. So what did we see? So basically, there will be regulations that define us with new, that define new safety critical use cases. We saw them, they are in a taxonomy, and also requirements for them are satisfied. But we can take a lot of things we learned in the past of safety critical components and use cases, because we can just reuse everything that you have to have in a test strategy. So you have to test the risk, evaluate it for every relevant condition and scenario. You have to mitigate the risk and have a systematic approach towards that. And third, you need to provide transparency and interpretability. I was not focusing my presentation here, but this is also something we are providing and equipping you with. And this will be able to satisfy the AI Act. The AI Act will be decided on this year, then it will go into a triage and into a 1 year of testing phase, and then it will become mandatory. So in not more than 2 years, we will have mandatory requirements for these critical use cases. And getting acquainted with the topic of high-risk applications, if you are in this, is very crucial, also starting now, that you're not surprised when the regulation comes. And this was basically my take on enabling trust in AI and how to get these abstract regulations into concrete test strategies. And I'm very interested to learn what's your testing strategy, and are you maybe in a high-risk application domain? Thanks a lot for the attention, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Yes, thank you, Florens. Really well done. I come to you. So I have one question.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate the risk in strong AI? I think this is always a keyword for everyone and still not really existing, but have you thought about that?
Can you tell me what you mean by strong AI?
Strong AI, like AI that is, maybe you can do it better than me, but like AI developing in intelligence, independent
like
from humans, like autonomous driving seems like that.
Yeah, autonomous. For general AI, if it's in a safety critical domain. So first of all, I don't believe that we are very close to it.
Yes.
We looked at a lot of use cases, and we were always able to find a failure in these systems. So there's not these intelligence insights that we need to compare to human intelligence. So I believe we're a bit further away, but I believe if it would exist, we would still be able to manipulate the system and optimize for noise. But just this noise must then look to us like will also confuse us then at the point. If the AI is good enough and we find noise to it, I believe it can only be real general AI and real human-like if it also would confuse us then.
Yeah. And another one, you were talking about like testing the risk, and at least you also mentioned transparency. I think that when you tested it, it's also important to create a transparency to the audience, right?
Yeah.
And I think most of the people, they are still afraid of AI, and I also always handle with that. But what do you think? Why are they still so afraid? Is it that they don't understand it? And how can we change it?
Yeah, I believe the society is afraid of AI because there were so many use cases failing in the past. I mean, there's a website called tesladeath.org or .com, where there's a huge list of people dying from the autopilot because there was not sufficient testing being done. There are a lot of cases, chatbots getting racist when they're exposed to humanity. So I believe we prove society that we have to be afraid of it. And if we don't test it before, and then society figures out how bad it is, then how should they trust it if we can not trust it by ourselves? So I believe there are a lot of examples that showcase why we don't trust it. And I believe only with profound testing before you deploy it, you can really generate trust in society.
Yes. I think we also had some questions. You, okay, start where you want.
2 questions. First, the whole testing thing, I know it's coming from the European Union, but we Germans like this, you know, validation testing, having TÜV-stempel on top on this. So what is your feeling? Will other Europeans take this off? Will we set standards? You know, like, will we be there the Streber as usual? So the German versus the rest, because it's international. And then the second is, what is like your business model in terms of, my first thought is all the consultancies out there, they are now having great business, integrating your solutions and others, because they know the process in the companies, they know where to tackle it, they have to go in. So I'm trying to figure out who will do all this testing, which we all underestimate, because every piece of software now needs to at least reconsidered if it's falling under this.
Yeah. So the first question, so there was 2 questions. The first question is who will lead this? And I believe we have a huge problem. We have certification institutes, and they made a lot of money by just stamping like cars and so on and providing a seal of approval. And they will have a really hard time rethinking their business model, because now there will be just a few persons, a bunch of programmers that sit there and use these tools. And we are seeing that these certification institutes have a very hard time, if it's TÜV or DEKRA, to rethink that. And there are platforms like Microsoft, and again, outside of Europe, that are able to provide the same thing. And so maybe we will even lose this game if we don't wake up and able to rethink everything. And the second question was in the direction of who will execute the test in the end. So at least what I'm hoping to do, and also generating partnerships with, is like, of course, the consultancies will be able to audit and test these requirements, and certification institutes if they wake up. And but like, I mean, just I want to mention one thing. Like there are some innovative products also in certification institutes. The TÜV IT, for example, creates also some smaller standards that one can use and specify the requirement with. But they all need a tool, and we are trying to put our tools into all of these, things, and people, like, yeah, it will be an independent party that has to measure this, but it has to be an independent provider who generates the tools. So basically, it's twofold answer maybe to this question, yeah.
Yeah, one quick question. You had one slide where you introduced the different areas where EU regulations are coming up, and I was missing healthcare as a...
What did you miss?
Healthcare.
Healthcare.
Anything around healthcare. I was wondering, is that due to this already being highly regulated, or what's your perspective?
I didn't really mention this, but like in the end, there was also like one bullet point called safety components, and everything that was safety critical before is still safety critical afterwards. So I didn't explicitly mention it in this section, but I would see it, and at least how I would interpret it, I would see it in this corner and in this category.
Okay, I got my coming out. I'm German and I'm a consultant for AI.
Awesome.
So I just wanted to know, because of the certification, when do you think there will be a kind of DIN or ISO certification for trustable and no-risk AI?
Yeah, this is, I mean, first of all, there must be regulation before you can provide this seal of approval, of course. You can also provide some seals that are some kind of specification where you say, okay, these are my quality requirements, and an independent institute tested it against it. So these seals can come before, but I believe only when the regulation is there, and when we look at the AI Act, maybe there will be some standards that will exceed or like be faster than this, but I believe at the day when it becomes mandatory, and even at the transition period before, there will be products and there will be seals that you will be able to apply. Cool.
So many questions. Really cool. So
Cool.
you will still be here, right? And
Definitely.
the others, hopefully, they are also here. And I'm happy to connect later. So thank you for your presentation, Florens.
Thank you very much.